Shymkiv, Deputy Chief of Staff of President's Administration and the key person on reforms. Пані і панове, ми вітаємо пана Дмитра Шимківа, заступника глави адміністрації президента України.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you. I would like to welcome you all. I'm sorry for being unable to be here at 1 o'clock as I promised, and to tell you about what was happening in the last week with the reforms, because we had the meeting with the president, and unfortunately I could not leave the meeting. I would like to tell you what was happening during last week, and I would like to share with you about our plans for the next week. First of all, a lot of work was done around the draft law on anti-corruption bureau. Alexander Daniluk and myself are working on that at the presidential administration. We received the draft law from the cabinet of ministers. We worked on it, finalizing it, and we submitted it to the parliament. The details about this draft law we will share with you next time, because there are so many details there. There are many aspects. There were many discussions going on, many speculations, but we were trying to do it so that the law reflects what the society expects. And we were trying to have the Greco recommendations included, the group on reforms was also working on that, and other organizations. Now, talking about the directions which I mentioned last time, we are working on the structure of interrelation of a group that is working on reforms. We are making the infographic which will show you all the structures which are working on reforms. These are advisory groups, cabinet of ministers, national council on reforms, the Verkhovna Rada, committees of Verkhovna Rada, donors, civil society, the whole constellation of creative agencies is working on that. We want to show you where this coordination takes place, where the decisions are made, and next time we will show how it looks like. Also, the issue of 3G. I know that it's being discussed. Tomorrow we'll have the meeting of the Cabinet of Ministers. We do hope that there will be the governmental resolution there. We had meetings about that resolution at the Cabinet of Ministers. There's a discussion about how the tender is to be organized on using the frequency for 3G, whether there should be one band or three bands of frequencies. I was present there from presidential administration, and I expressed the point of view of the presidential administration, and we expect that the Cabinet of Ministers will listen to us. It is most important. The main priority is to get maximum revenues for the state, to preserve maximum competition in the market, and introduce technologies so that the money for conversion of military radio location stations, so that all that is done for the money which come as investments, or the money which we get from leasing the frequency range. Also, an important issue was about healthcare sector. There are two working groups developing two strategies of development of healthcare system here. One at the Ministry of public health. One council is advisory council is funded by Soros Foundation. They do a very high quality work. I received the first documents of this working group and the plan of actions as to reform in the healthcare sector. These are very high quality reforms. I will not talk in detail, but there is another advisory group which works on the project of the World Bank. There are some difficulties there, and we hope that in the nearest future the situation around this process will improve. There were meetings on electronic public procurements. There are working groups which are set up by electronic platforms in Ukraine that work on business environment where the electronic procurements are taking place and how the state could be involved into that. We consider the idea that I suggested at one roundtable to propose to governmental authorities to try and start doing electronic procurements at private platforms in the range up to 100,000 hryvnias, which basically the state bodies can do without the tender, but they can test that at electronic platforms. That is discussed in the society, and we express different viewpoints about how public procurements are to be held, whether there should be one organization which is responsible for electronic public procurements, or maybe there should be the ability to use several electronic platforms. This issue is being discussed. There are some legislative initiatives in the parliament. There are some comments about that, but I would like to mention that the work in the direction of electronic public procurements is going on. That's a big group which includes experts, public, civil society, and the state. So these are the basic directions in which we are working, talking about Cabinet of Ministers, because we had the meeting of the Executive Committee of Reforms. That's the second one already. And the process of the regulation has been announced in the Cabinet of Ministers. Unfortunately, Astap Semrak failed to join me today, but next time we'll talk more about the regulation of the authorities, especially from controlling bodies. There are some there's some work that has been done, and there's the statement by the Prime Minister, but we'll tell about that in more detail later. Your questions, please, colleagues. Don't forget to introduce yourselves. Ukraine channel, you are saying that you will, in detail, next time, talk about something, talking about reforms. We would like to hear clearer what the reforms will be about, because the previous authorities were also trying to do a lot. Could you repeat your question, please? Could you, in more detail, describe the process of reforming what you are talking about? Okay. The process of reforming takes place because, well, we need to understand what are we reforming and what we will believe to be the result of the reforms. To talk about the reform of the healthcare, we need to understand what should the healthcare system be like. If we are talking about the European system of public health, it differs from country to country. If we look at the structure of health sector in Canada, in the United States and other developed countries, we'll see different models, which means that, first of all, we need to understand what will be the model. We need to work on the process of transfer from the today's situation to the future. We need to understand where we are moving. We need to have an action plan, and we need to start implementing the action plan. Talking about the regulation, which I've mentioned together with Pavlo Sheremetyev, There's a clear list of deregulation initiatives which are to take place today. If you look at the website Easy Business in Ukraine, there's a list of deregulation initiatives talking about deregulation about packaging or utilization. There are specific draft laws registered in the parliament, so there should be voting. And there are resolutions of the Cabinet of Ministers which are to be cancelled. The previous are to be cancelled to remove certain regulations, to have deregulation in controlling bodies. For that, the Cabinet of Ministers resolutions are to be passed, and the Prime Minister has stated already about some specific actions about the reduction of number of regulatory bodies. These are specific things. If you compare the previous authorities and these authorities, first of all, I would like to mention there's a vision about how we should be moving. We need to reach more consensus because the revolution of dignity led to the split of power, and we need to find agreement between different organizations or structures which we have in power now or in political arena. You're talking about two strategies about healthcare system. What are these strategies? You are saying about two strategies. There are two groups in the Ministry of Public Health which are working on the strategy of reforming the public health sector. One has been set up recently, and the minister announced that, and that group is financed by Renaissance Foundation. Another group has been working longer than the first one, and it's also developing the reforms in public health sector, and that's part of the project of the World Bank. They're planning to get, in the result of that project, they will get the funding, and the project will cover 10 regions of Ukraine. To explain it in more detail, for that we need to have a big briefing where we will explain which regions, 10 regions, how the reform in each region will be taking place, how will the reform be implemented in the center. There is such a thing as e-health, monitoring the patients, and that's a big book on which a group of experts is working. They will complete it and they will submit it to the World Bank for approval. That's the process. The World Bank allocates money for that. The grant, in the result of the process is to be approved by the World Bank. Then there will be the procedure of getting the loan on special terms, and then money from the World Bank will be used to implement it in different regions of Ukraine. You said that you submitted the draft law on anti-corruption bureau. Could you tell us what are the main things there? In the nearest future, we will tell about it in more detail. We want to devote the whole briefing to that. We want to invite the colleagues who were working on it. The main principles are independence of the body. It should be focused on investigatory actions towards the high civil servants, also investigatory activities, senior civil servants, and the issues that mass media were talking about, that economic crimes are included there. Now it's only about corruption. And the electronic public procurements, when this draft will be implemented, and also the draft on public health. I don't think we'll can see the results on the public health soon. It would be good to invite the Minister of Health here. I am invited to the meeting of this advisory council. There are plans. I know what the process should be, but it would be easier to report about that after the meeting, which will be held, I believe, on the 9th of September. Talking about electronic procurements, there's a draft law by Ksenia Lapina, which is still in the parliament. There are some comments to that draft law. We met with a team of experts that will be involved into developing the draft. There are also some comments on the possibility to exclude, for example, the reference to state companies in the law. There are some remarks to the draft law, because this law will organize the process of electronic procurements. It explains the process. There are different viewpoints among the experts. We don't want to see just one state platform. It would be great to see different commercial companies that would be able to provide such services to state organizations free of charge. That's important. One of the main principles is that for the state, if this is a commercial company, this should be free of charge for the state. There's Georgian experience. The Georgians were developing such system, and we have discussions with them, and they they are also thinking about how to improve their own system. To tell you that the group is working. In the majority, this is initiative group. There are people from RPR, from other entities. There are legal issues there, technological, the issues of time frame, because we would like to see it as soon as possible. I have two questions from UCMC. The first one is on the draft law on Anti-Corruption Bureau. There were some problematic issues. Have they been resolved, and what's your forecast? What will happen with this draft law next? If there are two scenarios, optimistic and pessimistic, please tell about them. And what is the mission of your mission? You were saying that you are planning to switch the presidential administration to governance, to electronic documents. When this work will finish, when the staff of presidential administration will be optimized. Most of the issues which were discussed in the society, they were addressed in the beginning of August at the meetings that were held in the presidential administration. We were discussing issues about how to organize this body, how the head is elected, who appoints, who dismisses. There are many aspects, the structure, the subordination, and so on. There were some speculative statements, but I believe the document will answer all these questions. Talking about e-governance, that's an interesting process. In the presidential administration, we're not just switching to e-governance. We are optimizing the structure. It's not just optimization of the structure of the presidential administration, but bodies which are around the presidential administration. There was a presidential decree prepared, maybe it's already signed, as to liquidation of 22 advisory bodies at the president that existed. There were people there. There were some of these bodies were staffed, some not. To liquidate 22 advisory bodies, For that, we had to annul 60 orders and resolutions. Legally, it had to be done all correctly. And there's also some of the decrees are cancelled, where Yanukovych had such a personnel reserve, and we are trying to cancel that order. Also, I submitted to the president for nominees to the National Council on Reforms, but I will preserve the intrigue. Talking about documents, circulation of documents, to introduce that. What's happening? That is replacement, the change of processes. We are training people. We need to train people how to use electronic media. We are doing it using only the people who work at the presidential administration and volunteers. In the beginning, we were working on 8 processes, now 20 processes. Some processes are not documented. We need to find some processes are over-regulated. The regulations were issued in 2005, for example. The plan is electronic governance. All the processes are to be finalized by the end of the year. For example, some processes are operating in e-governance. People are sending the certain documents. I was working with the documents. I was approving some of them by electronically, by email. And we are working on interaction with other authorities so that they send us documents in electronic format. From the new year, it will be working full range. And another question on optimization of personnel. You say that there are too many people in the authorities. They're not too effective. When people come here from Georgia, they say that what they started with, they changed the labor legislation. You know, that people are to be warned 3 months in advance. All the people who worked at the presidential administration are warned. And I believe the last day of their when they end the office will be 18th of October. I did not mention that, but there is a group, legislative group. We are looking at the drafts of the law on civil service. I believe that the replacement of people who work in civil service is so important, because without replacing people, changing people, we will not change the system. There are, for example, the team has prepared the law on secondment. That's an opportunity where people could be, who work in organizations, could be seconded and to work in the civil service, but they will receive their salaries from the organizations where they work or from some fund. We are discussing this draft with some small group of people. We need to attract people to civil service, preserving the principles of anti-corruption, but understanding that the state doesn't have money to attract specialists of high quality so that they have the salary at the level that they had. This is the form of mobilization to civil service. I have a draft law which I consider there's a draft law on civil service. Igor Kaliushka submitted that, and the ICPS. And we have our own versions, and we look at all of them. We need to change legislation, but we also need to look at the transitional process. Thank you, Dmytro, and we'll see you again in a week.
You told there will be you will lay people off from the administration, presidential administration. How will you do it, and or how did you do it, and how many people did you dismiss? When I came to the, we had 539 people working for the administration of the president, and now the number of people, it's 423 on the staff. So we dismissed about 56 people. And also we are planning to dismiss a big number of people. Let's call it all were told, were informed on that, and depending on their positions, all heads of independent departments in the administration of the president, and they are interviewed by Boris Loshkin individually. Also, there is requirements to knowledge of English, and people who are responsible for structural department. Also, there is a requirement we should update 70% or upgrade 70% of our staff, and I believe that since November 1st, it will be absolutely new administration of the president in all departments. So there will be cuts. So now 400 people received information that there is a big chance that they will be dismissed. Thank you very much. We're done. Let's call it a day, and we will